Welcome to the YOUnify podcast. If you are new here, YOUnify is a global nonprofit organization. We are dedicated to helping youth flourish and thrive. My name is Brandyn Keating, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of YOUnify, and also the host of this podcast. I'm super excited today to be joined by our own YOUnify Director of Engagement, Pedro Silva, and the Planning and Engagement Strategist for the City of Boulder, Colorado, Vivian Castro-Woolridge. And we are going to have a great conversation today about some really exciting ways in which the City of Boulder is actually modeling for the country how more voices can be heard in some of the key policies that affect our daily lives. So a lot of times when we think about the policies that affect our daily lives, we think about what's happening with the federal government, but there are actually an enormous number of policies that affect our lives that are happening in our local and our state government. And these policies really deeply impact whether we can flourish and thrive and the degree to which we can all flourish and thrive. A lot of times people don't even know that they're at stake and that their voice can be heard in them. So I'm super excited to talk with both Vivian, who sort of helped design some of the amazing processes that the City of Boulder is using, and Pedro, who is, again, our YOUnify Director of Engagement and also a resident of Boulder and has helped operationalize and design some of those processes on the ground as well. So welcome, Vivian and Pedro. So excited to have you here today. Vivian, let's start off with you. Would love if you can share with us a little bit more about what your role is in the City of Boulder and kind of what you do in the day-to-day.
Sure. And thanks for the invitation to be here with you and Pedro today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So my role is planning engagement strategist for the City of Boulder. And essentially what that means is that I help connect people to our planning processes. So we're oftentimes looking at like long-term changes that could be quite transformative or not if we just continue down the same path. And so I help the city really lean into thinking strategically about how we make a bigger table. How do we make sure that when we're talking about really important decisions that affect us all, how do we make sure that we have more chairs at the table or have a bigger table and not only hear from the people who have typically been involved? And sometimes I hear that some people in the community think that that we do too much engagement even, so too much public participation. And what I've really come to understand is that a lot of the challenges that we're really faced with today, in terms of like climate change, housing crisis, these are really complex problems. There's no one solution that can just magically fix some of these big challenges. And because of that, there's so many different solutions that could impact people very differently. And so we need to hear a lot of different perspectives. And so my job is to figure out how to provide a warm invitation to all people, and including those who may not have traditionally been at the table. And so this past year, I'm really excited. We've been trying some different things, like working with artists, for example, to kind of like tap into some more creative ways of engaging with the city and sharing input than maybe just like an open house or going to a city council meeting, which might not be very appealing to some. I'll stop there for now.
Amazing. That's fantastic. And would love to know just a little bit more about how you became you. Where did you grow up? What kind of roles did you play in the world before you stepped into this role? And how did you become passionate about this kind of work?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in Southern California called Corona, California.
Hmm.
It's in between LA and San Diego, kind of inland. Growing up, it was about 30,000 people. So really had a small town vibe. I'm a first generation American. My parents came to the US in their 20s with really little financial resources, but a lot of courage and creativity and worked really hard, built a life here, and really taught me that leadership starts with caring for others. So growing up, our family was often painting houses with Habitat for Humanity or putting together gift baskets during the holidays to give to families in need. And my parents really loved bringing people together.
Mm.
So even now, my mom throws amazing parties. And I think that's where I really learned at an instinctual level that leadership starts with connection,
Yeah.
and knowing people, right? Knowing who's in your community.
Yeah, I love this idea of leadership starting with connection. Obviously, that's a vibe that we share in Unify. And, just thinking about how could civic engagement, how could getting involved in the decision making in your community feel more like a party? I love that thought.
Yeah, and even with my two kids, like I'm trying to bring them up to see that leadership and community work can be joyful and caring
Mm.
and shared, and that when we help others flourish, we flourish too. So yeah, so I can see a lot of like synergies between our approaches to this, I think. Um, but yeah, I think, being oldest in immigrant family, kind of knowing the woes and the celebrations of an immigrant life, um, and always really being interested in how our societal and institutional structures support people or hold them
Mm.
back. That's always been a real keen interest of mine. And I had the opportunity to live and work abroad for 20 years, advising governments in municipal infrastructure or urban governance and city planning. And now I've some life changes during the pandemic. I've landed in Boulder, Colorado, and helping more people have a voice in city planning. Um, and I think I know this topic of flourishing leadership, when I think of flourishing leadership and what's that meant in my career, I think it means creating spaces where everyone can belong and contribute. And that's something I'm always striving for.
Amazing. And such a beautiful attitude to bring towards governance. Really, really appreciate that. Pedro, let's bring you into the conversation. Pedro, you're a resident of Boulder and you had quite a journey to get to Boulder through your life. Let's hear a little bit about you and how you became you and where your life started off.
So I have a really multi family. I just call it multi because pretty much every way that we can be multi we can be. We're multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and all of those things informed how I showed up in the world. But I was raised originally in a stricter environment with my grandmother. So that restriction put a tension where I loved all these people that I was supposed to also save. And that kind of created some tension with my family. But through conversation with my family members, I kept learning more and more about the ways they saw the world, the different perspectives they had. My mother is a Black American. My dad was Portuguese and Cape Verdean. And then my dad married a white person and moved to Mississippi, of all places. And so I had to navigate this tension in the 80s between this place in the South in Virginia and this place in Mississippi when interracial families was not really a thing. And that also kind of set me up for conversations that I just started having at an early age. And for a minute, I took it for granted because I just assumed any person would just be able to have a conversation with someone that was different from them because it had become the air I breathe. And it took me a while to realize how much effort it takes to put oneself in a space where cognitive dissonance happens and to allow their brain to go through those challenges and get into those tensions. And so as I navigated my career from the military to corporate to ministry and then into this space, it was always trying to help people build their capacity to engage people across differences, not just for the sake of the person on the other side, but for their own sake, because as they engage those people, they build greater capacities within themselves. And then I've kind of threaded all of that with a lot of different artistic expressions. So
Mm.
I write poetry, I do comedy, I write music, and I do all of those things because I know that there are some ways of communicating that can get kind of under the radar and
Yeah.
help people be more receptive when they don't know they're being receptive. Like there's things you can say as a joke that if you said it in a certain way, a person may get offended or be protective. But if you say it in a comical way, they're like, "Oh, you got me." You made me think, and that might not have been something they were planning on doing, but once they do it, they can't stop. So those are some of the other ways that I try to extend this invitation for people to experience themselves and others more deeply. And obviously, that led me to YOUnify throughout the different career paths that I've engaged in. But I've always shifted because I also don't like doing what doesn't work. So if I'm
Mm.
doing something and I find that it's not effective anymore, I have a hard time continuing it, and I'd rather start over and try something different and make the most out of this adventure of life.
Amazing. And what's one thing that I mean, you have a lot of interesting and surprising contradictions about you, but maybe what's one thing that the people who know you might even be surprised by? One, hobby or interest or anything.
I'm kind of an open book, so I don't know how many people will be surprised by anything that I do or that I start doing. However, I think that I don't know where this podcast will go, but I people make assumptions based on externalities a lot of times or environments and things like that. And I think it's surprising to people sometimes that I don't tend to match their initial expectations. Just like if they look on the outside and they see a black guy, but then they hear my name and then they're confused about that. And then they find out I speak Chinese, which is also somewhat confusing. And then I'm a pastor or I have been a pastor. And then they see me like I've had instances where one night I did stand-up comedy on a Saturday night, and it so happened that the next day this guy was at a church I was preaching at. And
Ah.
his face was staring at me the whole service and he kept whispering and whispering. And then at the end, he said, "Did you do comedy last night?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And then he was like, "I told you, Mom, he's a comedian. He's not a pastor. They just had him speaking here," when it was actually the other way around.
Right.
But so those kinds of things I think surprise people, but people who've known me long enough, they're just like, you would do some random thing that I didn't think you were gonna do.
There you go. Vivian, how about you? What's one thing that we might be surprised to learn about you? Some kind of a talent or an interest or a hobby that's hiding there underneath the surface?
Um, Not exactly a hobby, but what comes to mind is that I've bounced around the world quite a bit, and I'm
Mm.
still deeply connected with a group of childhood friends from like kindergarten and first grade, which I think is quite rare. And so that really grounds me as I go
Yeah.
out in the wide open world. Yeah, and I'm not sure a lot of the people that I work with professionally today know that.
Oh, I love that. So amazing to keep those sort of human connections that we grew up with. I think that's awesome. And it's not easy to do in the world that we have today either.
It can be hard work, right? People change, and so I think that's also like a lot of good practice
Yeah, for
for a lot of the
sure.
stuff we're talking about too, how to show up for
Yeah.
each other.
So let's dig in to the work that we've been doing together and that you've been doing and playing a key role in leading around the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. As I mentioned at the top, a lot of the policy that really deeply affects our daily lives gets created at the local and state level. And of course, you're working there at the municipal level and very closely entwined with the county. So maybe just to give people a sense of what is the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. That kind of sounds like a little bit of a word salad. And how does it affect, like, how is what happens, what gets decided as part of this process that you're leading, actually, like the stuff that's going to go in there, how does that affect people's day-to-day lives?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, at its core, the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, I agree that's a mouthful, is a set of policies, a set of policies that really guide how the city changes or doesn't change over a course of time. And all departments of the city rely on the comp plan to guide their work and also their budgets, developing their budgets and figuring out what are
Mm-hmm.
priorities. So it's a set of policies covering lots of different things because it's comprehensive, and also a land use map. So a land use map, future land use map saying that in the future, our land can be used in certain ways. So some of the things that people are maybe more familiar with in Boulder are that we have a green belt, we have open space that
Mm-hmm.
has been protected to provide us with a limited area where urban services and housing can be built up, and then we're surrounded by this rural area. So that is a key choice that is reflected in the comprehensive plan. That's one. The comprehensive plan can also help define what types of housing and how much housing can be built over time. So the city does not produce housing, but we dictate the rules. So for
Mm.
example, there are some parts of the city, actually, the area with the largest land area at the moment has single family detached housing. So we're in a conversation now to talk about whether some of that should allow for different types of housing or not. We also have a wonderful bike trail system, for example. So those sorts of things come out of priorities that we hear from the city and then get turned into investments so that people can move around joyfully and conveniently, safely, all those things. For this time, we've heard a lot of new things because we've invited a lot of new people to join the process. So we've been
Mm-hmm.
hearing things about how we need to strengthen our local food system. So this is maybe not something super typical in a comprehensive plan, but we're trying to figure out what that means and how our policies and land use map could help with that need that we're hearing. We've also heard a lot about how the city can facilitate a stronger sense of belonging in a
Mm.
multicultural and multi-generational city. And so we're really thinking about the comp plan this time, not only in terms of the built environment, but also in terms of our social values and also our economics and who gets to participate in the economy, and thinking about how we can have a city that supports opportunity for all.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that this touches almost every aspect of life. It touches our food, it touches how we are able to provide and access housing, how we are able to provide and access jobs and what the economy looks like, how we deal with natural resilience to natural hazards or natural disasters. Sounds pretty comprehensive indeed. And I think, if anybody's listening or watching and thinking, well, I don't live in Boulder, why does this matter to me? Every city and town across the country, no matter how alike or different to Boulder it is dealing with these same challenges. The challenges of how we house people and how we ensure that there are different kinds of and affordable housing, how we make choices about the economy and what businesses can go where, how we make choices about transportation, and things that affect the natural world around us and our food supply. So guaranteed, no matter where you are in the country, your city, town, county, state officials are thinking about and working on these same issues. And part of what we're going to be unpacking here is how everybody across the whole country can be more deeply part of those conversations. This is kind of a model that we're examining, a real live example in Boulder.
Yeah, and Brandon, what I think is really great is it's an opportunity for a community conversation. So
Yeah.
for people to kind of think of it like going, you don't go to the doctor only, or you shouldn't go to the doctor when you're very sick. But best practice is you go regularly for a checkup to say like, what's working, what should I do more of? What could I maybe change a bit? What can I change a lot in terms of lifestyle, nutrition, et cetera? So it's kind of like a check-in for us to
Yeah.
think about, like, do we like the course we're on? Like, why is the future different than today? And like one concrete thing that we're seeing is that people work differently, right? After the pandemic, people don't
Yeah.
necessarily go into the office every day. People maybe are at home more, so maybe they need different things closer to their homes. Um, and so those are some of the interesting things that we're having conversations about.
And so, what inspired you initially? And actually, I should, just as backdrop to this question, say, I think a lot of us recently have just been absolutely inundated by all of these sort of divisive images and messages in our news feeds, seeing on television these town halls, which are meant to be a forum for public input, where people are yelling, they're getting pulled out by security guards. Doesn't feel like a very welcoming environment. So, with all of this in the background, how did you become inspired to say, you know what? In this divisive environment where people are really polarized and government functions are seeming really difficult, we're going to make this an inclusive and joyful process. And we're not going to go run and hide as a government. We're going to invite more voices to the table. How did you get inspired to carry that forward and sort of get the courage to do that?
I think maybe part of it is kind of like my innate nature and way of being, and then that's like maybe the team and the individual kind of side of things. But I think I'm also very fortunate to work in a structure that leans into our equity policies as a city and organization and work. And so I really feel that commitment to asking new questions and making sure that when we take recommendations to our policymakers, like they're based on having heard from many different voices. And so I think cities are at different parts of that journey, right? It might be farther along or just starting out exploring some of those more equity-minded policies for engagement. And you're right that I think there is a lot of distrust of government at all levels. And I also think that there's a lot of opportunity to
Mm,
shape what happens in a city. Um, First of all, a lot of our advisory boards are based on volunteers. So people
mm,
can volunteer for a wide range of advisory boards in the city, and those are community members, right,
mm-hmm.
who volunteer their time to really learn about issues and provide advisory services to our elected officials. Um, so going into this process, we knew we wanted to have the most inclusive process to date. We
Mm-hmm.
also know that people like to provide their feedback and participate in many different ways. So what works
Mm.
for one person may not work for another.
One size doesn't
And
fit
so,
all.
yeah, so we have to provide variety, right? I think variety
Mm,
is really important. Some people maybe want to be more deeply involved. Some people prefer a lighter touch. And Pedro alluded to the work of like that nexus of art and engagement. So we have been working with artists in different way for this process. We also knew that it would be important to have some trusted partners in the
mm,
community who are not necessarily advocacy groups, but maybe who have trusted networks and partnerships in the community that we may not have. They call a meeting, people are likely to come, and if the city, calls the same meeting, those people may not come. And so we know that those relationships are really important, and so trying to find partnerships that are really based on like mutual respect and maybe mutual vision of how to work.
mm,
And so really being open-minded to hear advice on new ideas to try, like leaning into an invitation for people to host their own conversations in their own homes or their own public, like in public places, and bring their own networks together. And also another local group here linked this comp plan work to some work that they were already doing on creating a people's plan. So I think, I think being really strategic about some partnerships that can help you hear new things and help
Yeah.
bring people into the process.
Yeah, and part of what I hear there is, a lot of times people who are trying to advocate and the government decision makers are nearly in an adversarial relationship where advocates are advocating at government. And what I hear from you is an invitation to let's come in and work on the same team, actually, which I think is really wonderful. And Pedro, not only are you our director of engagement, but you are also a resident of Boulder. And, I think Boulder, like the rest of the country, is no stranger or is not separate from this sort of challenge of trust that we're seeing all over the country. Trust in each other, trust in people who might come from a different background, and trust in government, trust in institutions generally. And I'd love to bring in your perspective as both a resident of Boulder and somebody who helped to organize those parties hosted in the community where we gathered input and some other events. What's your perspective on kind of where the start point was in this journey of trust? And then we'll get into in a minute kind of how this process has helped that trust along.
If I can, I would probably start off by backing away from the word trust just a little bit, only
Mm-hmm.
because even right now, trust is a triggering term for some people.
Mm,
They can't talk about trust without thinking about why they don't trust. And
interesting.
that's been a really difficult thing to navigate with some people because of that very adversarial relationship that exists that you mentioned before, but also institutions and what institutions used to stand for has become very nebulous. And so a lot of people, whether it's the church, whether it's the government, or even corporate structures, the stability that people used to have in institutions, thinking this institution is going to stay the same forever, is gone. It
Mm,
doesn't really exist anymore, and people haven't caught up to that reality. And so it's really difficult for some people to find a footing. And when you ask them to trust, they're afraid to invest the energy of trust, because when people trust, they think that in a static terms. Part of trusting is the belief that something's going to stay the same. And so if they try to attach themselves to something and then it changes a week from now or a month from now or however long, that just freaks people out. And so what I've been trying to lean into with people is being more reflective and thinking more about how they show up and what they bring to places. Do they
mm-hmm.
bring a trustworthiness on their own? Of how, because if a person's being honest, most of us are also not static beings and we don't stay the same, but we want something else to stay the same for our sense of safety. And so I try to invite people to either be conscious of the fact that they are a continually evolving being, and that the processes, the way that even the way that we do things at YOUnify is we look at everything as being iterative processes. So every encounter informs the future encounter, and it's not just an idea that we hold in our heads and say it's going to stay this way no matter what input we get, no matter what feedback we have. We're going to force it to be the way that we imagined in our minds before the people showed up. That makes no sense. So I think the new idea of trust will probably need to evolve where it's dynamic people in participating in dynamic processes with dynamic organizations. And so that also contributes to the sense of flourishing that we're trying to promote. And so I think to a large degree, with this process, that's been the way that I've been trying to invite people. And there were some local tensions that were happening at the same time that this was going on. So I had a lot of conversations I didn't intend to have or plan on having that were very that had a lot of tension in them. But as Vivian knows, I had a birthday party recently, and I decided to invite people who.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. I decided to invite some people who had tensions with each other to the party. I didn't invite everybody who had tensions with each other because I didn't want to find myself monitoring and being stuck. But what I witnessed was the way that I was honest when I engaged with people and I listened to them with their criticisms and them expressing their lack of interest in jumping straight to trust, if I can put it that way. But then it was kept inviting, and I kept telling people, I'm gonna invite you until you tell me to stop, you know. So and so I kept doing that, and then some of those folks came to my birthday party, and at the earlier point of the party, it was probably like 70 or more people here, and I saw people who I know had tensions with each other talking to each other at the party. And I think that it wasn't because all of a sudden they started trusting each other again, but I think that the dynamism of our nature started to encounter each other and they were able to honor all of the dynamism. And that kind of opens a doorway to something that's probably bigger than trust, but I don't have a word for it yet.
Fantastic. And part of what I hear as you and Vivian are talking, Pedro, is the idea of melting away the distinction between our personal and our social lives and our civic lives, or the part of our life that could be connected to government or politics, that we can kind of melt away the wall that some of us put between those things, because in reality, if we're not participating, somebody else is, and making the decisions that are going to affect our daily lives, right? Um, and I'd love to get into a little bit more of the concrete with both of you about kind of how this is playing out in the community, what the process has really looked like, what kinds of events are happening. And before we jump into that, I just want to invite anybody who's listening, if you're thinking, well, gee, I'd like, my voice to be heard more in these kind of decisions that are made locally, but, I don't live in Boulder and I don't know where to begin. One thing that I would love to invite you to do is actually like, share, comment, subscribe, all of the things for wherever you're seeing this episode, whether it's on YouTube or you're getting a social media clip of it. That can help by spreading the message of this kind of governing that's more inclusive to more people. And the more people that know that we can actually shift the process, the more allies we're all going to have in shifting the process and approaching governance in a more flourishing way and in a way that's more inclusive to everybody. Additionally, we're going to have links in in the post below where you can click in and get involved with some easy first steps on how you can do this kind of thing in your own city or town, both through our Write the Future campaign and otherwise. So please take a minute to do all those things now, if this is piquing your interest. And Pedro and Vivian, let's get more into the concrete of how this is playing out in the community. So maybe Vivian, if you could give us an overview. You mentioned a little bit of some of the different kinds of events that you've been holding, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. I know you worked with a group that brought theater into it. You have a civic assembly that has been happening, a community assembly, different ways and modes of getting people's voices heard. So maybe if you could share a little bit, kind of paint a picture of what some of those events have looked like.
Yeah, I'd love to. And kind of take you through, I think I've borrowed this term from you, like the arc of engagement. So we really tried to think very strategically, like what type of input do we need from people, like, and tag those to the different decisions that would be made along the way and sort of be building along on each other. And so we really started very broadly, like just asking people, what are your hopes and dreams? And what do you like about Boulder? What could be better? Those sorts of like kind of more open-ended, big
The real
visionary
big
questions. Yeah.
picture, yeah.
And we started with a local group who really is really specializes on sort of more social justice type of improv theater and has a very talented way of talking about or bringing to the light very difficult topics, but in a way that that is very powerful, but also very more bringing people in rather than calling people out. And so I, I really strongly believe that our work with Modus Playback really helped set the stage for like being open to listen to all perspectives, no matter how difficult they might be.
Mm.
And so we did a series of those, some that were really invitation only with historically excluded community members from representing lots of different, or members of lots of different communities. And then we opened up some of that storytelling to the broader community as well, so that people
And
could
Vivian,
hear each other's stories.
I just want to
Um,
pause you there to
yeah.
explain something because we're talking about being more inclusive. And then you also just mentioned there were these invitation only events. So can you just explain to folks, yeah, what's the balance there? Why were some of those events invitation only and then opened up to the broader community?
Sure. So we know that in a lot of our engagement events, there are power dynamics and
Mm,
people who are very much comfortable in attending our meetings and sometimes dominating, right? Because they might
mm-hmm.
have been involved in lots of different processes in the past, and it might be sort of unconscious dominating. But in any case, it doesn't allow people to really speak their mind, maybe. And also, there are a lot of other barriers to participating. One might just be that warm invitation from somebody that they trust, and it might not be me because they don't know me, or they might not have had a good experience with the city in the past, right? Another could be just knowing that there will get a nourishing meal, for example. And we might not be able to just provide a meal for the entire community, but we know that we can do that if we need to include people who have been historically excluded from our planning processes in the past, and we can prioritize resources to hear from those groups. And so I think I don't shy away from bringing together people from lots of different walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
But I have also learned that you need to build in more time for getting in a little bit of relationship and people feeling comfortable sharing their stories. And sometimes in a 2-hour event, you just don't have that. And so if you
Mm.
do want to hear from people who have been historically excluded from government in the past, it can be beneficial to organizing events specifically for those groups. So we do that for university students. We just had a really great workshop at our local university where 80
Yeah.
university students attended. And I'm not sure we would have heard from them in the same way if they had just attended a group that, an event that was open to others in the community. We do that also for high school students.
Mm-hmm.
We've done that for through our Center for People with Disabilities. So we can really go a little bit deeper on the issues that are specifically impacting those groups.
Brilliant. That's thank you for clarifying that. And so you had the events with Modus Theater, kind of doing that storytelling and getting a big vision. What happened next?
Yeah, so we weren't only doing the theater, we were also doing some
Mm-hmm.
more traditional online questionnaires and community open houses and these sorts of things. But what we're really trying to do is figure out like what is coming up over and over and over, and it's top of mind for people from all walks of life in our city. Like where do people feel that we need to dig in more? And so doing that initial work to help us identify those top of mind issues,
Yeah.
which I think are very similar for cities all around the country, probably. Like the list
Mm-hmm.
might vary a little bit, but they include things like housing choice and affordability, climate action, um, safety, transportation and mobility, and this idea of belonging and having a multicultural, multi-generational city. So um, we were able to figure out like where do we as a team need to do more research and where do we need to dig in deeper with the community as well. And so that kind of guided the work and helped us start formulating like the questions where we wanted to go in a bit deeper and understand why these are top of mind.
Actually, I want to kind of go deeper into this point because I think it's a really important one. I think a lot of times people feel like by the time government asks for their input, most of the decisions have been made, and it's just maybe a little tweaking around the edges. Or they're coming with a request that government hadn't considered at all, and it sets up a very adversarial relationship. And what I'm sounds like I'm hearing from you is rather than kind of determining what are the big issues that we're going to dig in on sort of in a back room or amongst yourselves as a staff or as government decision makers, you actually ask the community that very basic question of what is the big vision and what are the big issues, and used that to determine how you were going to dig in more deeply. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I can give you an example of like food systems was not really on our radar, so
Yeah.
we weren't assuming that we knew what all the challenges were and what this next comp plan should focus on. So food systems was really added as a focus area for this comp plan, and that wasn't, we hadn't anticipated. So
Wow.
there was really the spirit of openness and learning. And I kind of don't even see it as like a linear process that we're moving in. It's sort of loops, right? Like we're hearing, we're asking new questions, we're confirming, and then we're now at a point in the process where we've come up with a few solutions to different challenges that we've been hearing, but we're still testing to see, did we get it right? Is there support for these different directions or not? And I was talking earlier about sometimes the challenge of bringing people from different walks of life together into a room to discuss some of these challenges together. So there is what I would call our most collaborative form of engagement for this process, which is the community assembly. So this is a group of 48 randomly selected community members who represent different demographics intentionally. And they are meeting over 7 Saturdays. Actually, the last meeting is on October 18th. But this is the first time Boulder has organized an assembly. And some of the listeners might not be familiar, and so I won't go down the rabbit hole. But what an assembly is that is different from other things we do is that there are a couple steps of randomness. And so you are hearing from new people. It's not the people who typically come to city engagement processes because of the randomness in the selection. There's also the demographic criteria. So you make sure that it's a diverse group of people in the room grappling with the problem that is given to them to handle or to work through together. And then you give people enough time to learn together and learn from each other. So I think sometimes we just don't have the intentionality or the time or the resources to build in that time to learn from each other. And so the assembly is really meant for that. Through the assembly, we're not just trying to collect a whole bunch of different opinions. We're trying to figure out where there's common ground. And so this assembly for the comp plan is focusing on the issue of 15-minute neighborhoods and figuring out if this group believes that every neighborhood in Boulder should be a 15-minute neighborhood or not, and defining what a 15-minute neighborhood means for Boulder. And it might not sound that challenging of a problem, but when it comes to issues that require more land use, more density, it can be really hard because I think status quo is probably the easiest path to take. And when we want to make changes to our land use that can lead to more walkable neighborhoods, it can be hard to make that kind of a change neighborhood by neighborhood. And so that's why we're talking about this as a city through the community assembly. Community
Yeah.
assembly members also get to present their recommendations directly to our elected officials.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that's very different from other engagement as well, where it can feel like all the input is going into a blender and coming out the other coming out the other end. But this is
Yeah.
like a direct channel to our elected officials as well. So that's an important part
Amazing.
of the community assembly model.
Yeah. And Pedro, you've been part of the design of some of these events. You've been a participant in others that were designed by other groups. Can you give just like paint a real on the ground picture of maybe a moment or sort of vignette from one of the events that sticks out for you?
Well, there was one, not to go from our event, but in the space with Once and Future Green, which was one of the partners, um, there was this moment where it really felt like the highest possibility for the future because they were looking at 500 years from
Mm-hmm.
now. And so, which sounds like ridiculous if you're just a person that's thinking about your own immediate needs or concerns or those of your family that you know.
Yeah.
But to
Well, and
think,
paint the picture for us, Pedro. Like, what was the room like? Who was in the room? Like, if I walked in there, what would I be encountering? And how is the conversation structured about the 500 years?
so the room was really diverse. It was at a place called Junkyard Social, which
Mm-hmm.
is already a nonprofit space that's kind of known for being a space where people from different groups show up and have all kinds of events.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a welcoming space, and just the fact that it's kind of like a playground area on one side that's made out of like old buses and kind of rusty things. It didn't have any of the sanitized feel that a lot of spaces have, whether it's a theater or a meeting room or a conference room or something like that. So it wasn't sanitized. None of the chairs matched, none of the tables matched. It was just a space of humanity and all its expressions, and it
Mm.
was a really good mix of folks from different backgrounds.
And like, how many folks?
The numbers weren't that large, but the room was small, so it was hard to tell.
I think about 60 people.
60,
Okay, so
yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, so maybe 60 people, and but the feel of it was kind of like really, it was interesting because it was like an artistic expression, and that's where like the food systems thing came in, and there were just some ideas that reached far beyond our lifetimes, and I
Mm.
think that was the space that I think some of us may need to learn to think about more deeply, because when we think of it within terms of our own lifetime, there's a tendency to be a little selfish of what do I want to see instead of what do I hope for the world, even if I'm not here, because when you think in 500 years, you know that you and everybody you love isn't going to be there. So you're thinking, what kind of world do I want to create for generations that I will never know, and technologies and all the other things that will have even multiplied even more quickly than they already are. So that was a very interesting space to hold in the middle between the Modus event, which was more of a kind of tapped into people's emotions and expressions, and was like an visible expression, but it wasn't something that there was a codification aspect because people filled out forms and things, but it was more of an emotional expression and a visual expression of people's body movements expressing sentiments. And then this broader vision, like super hyper vision, they kind of set people up for having more questions as we moved into the spaces where we were more a part of. And so it was just an interesting dynamic, and you don't get into that many conversations about like what do you see for the world 500 years from now. So so that was
Yeah,
something
kind of.
that was really interesting. And
Yeah, kind of
I
breaking
think
us
it,
out of the normal, narrow, kind of policy interest that we might think of.
right.
We're coming to the end of
Yeah.
The room
time
was very
here.
colorful too, I must say. And
Oh
one
yeah, that
Colorful,
was
yeah.
colorful, very
yeah.
colorful.
with the like Mexican tablecloths and things like that. I was really struck by one woman who stood up and Spanish speaker who said, I wish more of my friends knew about this event because I think they would have gotten a lot out of it. And I think it's something that I've heard throughout a lot of our events is this
Same.
appetite, right? Like there's appetite for engaging more, connecting more. People are enjoying meeting other people and talking about the future.
Amazing. We're coming to the end of time here. So I want to kind of come back to this overall concept of flourishing, which I think that, what you are really doing, each of you in your roles, is helping to lead for greater flourishing in the community. And I'd love to hear from each of you, starting with Vivian. What is something right now that's challenging you personally about flourishing? And what is something that's helping you flourish personally?
So I think when I think about flourishing leadership, the thing that comes to mind is not having all the answers, but creating spaces where others can grow and be heard. And so something I am just in my like personally and professionally trying to lean into is really being more curious. Like we don't all have to agree, but um, asking good questions that are do not come with judgment can really
Mm.
help in that deepening understanding and connection, right? Like having connection be the goal rather than trying to be right. So that's something I'm really really trying to practice and model as well. And I think struggling, maybe talking about myself, telling my own stories. I think
Yeah.
opportunities like this are really great because storytelling is a powerful narrative.
Yeah. And Vivian, if you were to offer for people who are listening just one small thing they could do to kind of, maybe get more involved or have their own voice heard more, is there some just very small action as a first step that you would suggest for folks?
Share baked goods.
Share baked goods. I love it. Food, always a great unifier. And Vivian, we know you have to run. So would you let folks know how to get in touch with you if they want to learn more? And I'll put that in the comments as well. And then Pedro and I can close out.
Yeah, that's great. So, if people want to hear about what's happening in Boulder, or if you're here and you still want to join the process, it's not too late. Our project website is aboulderfuture.org, and there you can see what's coming up and get caught up on the process too. Thanks again to
Amazing.
both of you.
Well, thanks so much, Vivian. And Pedro, let's hear from you as well about, what is one thing that is challenging you about flourishing right now, and what's one thing that is helping you flourish?
What's challenging is inviting people into the consideration that just because we can't always put things into words doesn't mean that they don't have value. We seem to have very little space for silences in our communities and our societies. And we think that we have to know all the answers and figure everything out and be able to write a paper about it in order for it to have value. And I think that that's a mistake, and that sometimes we have to leave room and space for silences and for waiting, which are all natural parts of anything flourishing. Because a flower doesn't just flourish, like you don't plant a seed and pick the flower in the same day. Like
Mm-hmm.
the silence and the waiting and the stillness and the patience are all part of that process. And we tend to ignore that when we're trying to create communities and systems. And that I think is to our detriment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a challenge for me as an individual, but communicating it to other folks in a way that doesn't come off as a threat
Yeah.
is an interesting enterprise to be a part of. Yeah, that's what I would say.
And you mentioned at the beginning that you like to bring art into a lot of the ways in which you engage in people. Would you close us out with one of your original poems?
Yep. I have one called Listen Once and For All. So I'll share that one. It says, listen without words to what can only be spoken with silence. There is no loss, there is no gain, in the place where love is home. Like the top of the inhale and the bottom of the exhale, where in and out are one, and coming and going cease to be, there resides the thought that tells you what you already know. You are more than enough and worthy of all creation. Here is where in silence you hear the voice of the voiceless, noiselessly shouting, everything I am is communicating to everything you are, telling you once and for all, we have everything we need when we have each other.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for being here today, Pedro. And for anybody who would like to kind of help out with this mission that we're on to help more people flourish, we want to remind you that the book, Leadership for Flourishing, is out there for you to purchase. We'll put the link below. Please like, share, comment, all the things so that we can get this information to a broader audience and help more people flourish and thrive.
Awesome.
Thanks, Pedro. Beautiful poem, as always.
Appreciate it.
On the court.